Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a celebration of K-State's first book in the Marianna Kistler Beach Museum of Art's Common Work of Art. I'm Kathrine Schlageck, and I'm the Associate Curator of Education here at the museum. Tonight, I will be joined by Tara Coleman, who is the Web Services Librarian and Associate Professor of Library Sciences at Kansas State University, and she is also the coordinator of the K-State First Book program. In addition, we'll be joined by Professor of English, Lisa Tatonetti, and LGBT Resource Center Coordinator, Brandon Haddock, and both are members of the Indigenous Faculty and Staff Alliance. We look forward to sharing more about the book, the art, and our thoughts with you this evening. We are going to be leaving time for questions, which can be posted in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. You can also turn on closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. The talk is being recorded and will be posted on the museum's YouTube channel, and that's going to be accessible from our website, which is www.beach.kstate.edu. Before we begin, I would like to share that as the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is historically home to many Native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized Native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska. Many Native nations utilize the Western Plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delawares, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation for this institution was, and still is, stolen land. We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of Indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through Indigenous context is essential. So I'd like to begin this evening by asking Tara Coleman to talk a little bit about the history and the process of choosing K-State's first book, and a little bit more about why The Marrow Thieves was chosen as this year's book.
Thank you, Kathrine. I have been the coordinator for the K-State First Book since it started here. And on the screen, you'll see all of the books we have selected since the beginning, starting with The Hunger Games and ending this year with The Marrow Thieves. We have a large group of students, staff, and faculty who read books throughout the summer and the fall, trying to find books that we think will engage our students academically and socially, things that will be really great in class as well as outside of class, and offer opportunities for members of the community to participate as well. We want to help guide freshmen from their first year at K-State onward, and one way is by providing a common academic experience like a book. It sends the message that people in college read, even books that are not part of their study. We use a theme every year to help us select the book, and the theme we were looking at when we selected The Marrow Thieves was community. We were looking for books that talk about how we build it, the ways it come together to support each other, and how it changes the world. And our committee overwhelmingly supported The Marrow Thieves. There are a lot of wonderful reasons why we wanted The Marrow Thieves. When our committee read the book, they were really engaged by a book written by an Indigenous author that centers Indigenous people. That's something we haven't done yet at our university. And the book addresses a lot of issues that are important to our students, staff, and faculty, and issues that we want to talk about. And sometimes that can be challenging, and providing a shared book can offer an opportunity to go in a lot of different directions. The book talks about Indigenous people and history. It addresses issues of climate and the environment. It also highlights and affirms LGBTQ relationships. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to talk about it and to hear more about how other people on campus engage with the book. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
So, Tara, I know you have tons of events that you have set up and that there are more in the offing. These are just a few, but could you tell us some of the highlights of the events for this year?
Yes, I am so excited. If you're new to our program, all of the events that we provide are free and available. Because of COVID, we're trying our best to be hybrid, just like this event here. So most of the things you see on the list are going to be either all online, or it'll be a mixture of online and physically in a classroom or a lecture hall. I've highlighted the author visit on September 23rd at 7 o'clock. I will say that this right now is limited to people with an active K-State EID and password. And if you're a member of our community, we still want you to be involved, and we have so many other events on campus that you can participate in. I'm really excited by the events on September 16th and 12th. Nothing About Us Without Us and Indigenous Presence, Indigenous Features. We have 3 events hosted by our archivists during National Archives Month in October. Some of the events not listed yet are Indigenous Peoples Day, as well as some events that Dr. Haddock will talk about later on in this talk here. So join us. If you have any questions about the events coming forward, please let me know. And if you are interested in hosting your own event and you want help publicizing it, let me know, and I'm happy to spread the word.
Great, thank you, Tara. I'd like to talk a little bit about how the Beach Museum of Art has been participating in this program. We became involved with the first book in 2013. And since then, what we have done is once the book is chosen, our staff, we've had students help us, we've had the book committee help us, but we've worked to find art in our collection that resonates in some way with the book. And in fact, some years it's even been 2 works of art. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've always loved is that there's such a strong relationship between literature and art. And this is a way for us to really sort of give a visual face to the book. We chose this year this work by Neal Ambrose-Smith, and he is Salish Kootenai, Métis-Cree, and Sho-Ban. And his work in general really addresses a lot of contemporary issues, loss of culture, abuse and violence by majority populations, damage to the natural environment. These were several themes that Tara had brought up. But his work also celebrates survival and resilience. And I think The Marrow Thieves is a book about survival and resilience. So I think there's really a strong relationship there. His work usually is a mix of elements drawn from Indigenous knowledge and experience, medicine bundles, canoes, the trickster figure coyote that we see here, trailer homes, and then images or symbols from sort of the European world as well. And I really think as he looks at the world, there's sort of a sense of humor, but he also, you know, is very aware of sort of the depths of some of the crimes as well. In many cases, the coyote is almost an alter ego for Ambrose-Smith. He's a hero. And he and his mother have done a number of works together, and she talks about coyote as well. His mother is Jean Quick-to-See-Smith. And what she said is that the coyote is part of our Salish creation stories. He helped Amotkan turn on the lights at the beginning of the world. Coyote is also every human, foolish, bright, conniving, beneficent, helpful, greedy, and generous. Coyote is a trickster and is always turning everything around upside down. These are a few more works by Neal Ambrose-Smith from our collection. The first one is actually one that he did, the Big City Indian that he did with his mother, Jean Quick-to-See-Smith. And again, you see the coyote in this work. I think that the other thing that I really felt resonated for us is the fact that Ambrose-Smith is a storyteller, and the story is a really important part of the Marrow Thieves. And I almost see Ambrose-Smith as Miigwan, the main storyteller in the book. And Ambrose-Smith says this about stories. It's an important part of his work. He says, children's stories are the wonders we grow up with, the mystery, the charm, the fantasy, and the illusion. Tribal peoples have known this for thousands of years, as all things are connected, while others may recognize this as Newton's third law with a moral value or metadata. Learning about my family's past and reading Shakespeare's Tempest or Defoe's Robinson Crusoe make these connections for me. Listening to today's world news tells of Poe's The Mask of Red Death. Some stories and traditions never change. Such stories are found within all tribes, as we are all from tribes at some point, somewhere. Entertaining, teaching, and sharing. Rabbit, coyote, and raven are tricksters that help narrate my stories of tradition and identity. Storytelling is our first written language. As I listen to the world news, popular culture, and my elders, I practice our first language. So really these visions, like Miigwan's stories, are a big part of everybody's life. The present is overlaid with images from the past. We can only understand, says Ambrose-Smith, where we are now by understanding our cultural influences. So we're really excited that we are going to be able to do a virtual Let's Talk Art event with Neal Ambrose-Smith in March. Ambrose-Smith is a professor and the department head at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. Well-recognized artist, but he's also nationally known as a leading proponent of non-toxic printmaking techniques. And that is something that has been a big part of Jason Shula, the head printmaker in K-State's art department, has been working with. So we're really excited that we're going to be able to bring Ambrose-Smith onto campus. I'm looking to see if there's any questions yet, and I don't see any. So I am going to go ahead and let Lisa and Brandon and Lisa kind of share what I'm calling insights and connections. And we will go ahead and start with Brandon and then turn it over to Lisa. And then as they finish, we will have some time for questions at the end. So Brandon, take it away.
Thank you, Kathrine. I appreciate that. Like, I was a slide behind. I apologize. So, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Brandon Haddock. I am the coordinator here at K-State for the LGBT Resource Center in Diversity and Multicultural Student Affairs under the Intercultural Learning and Academic Success Division. And as Kathrine had mentioned, I am a part of the Indigenous Faculty Staff Alliance here at K-State. And I'm very happy that we're talking about this book. You know, when Tara and I had our initial conversation, I was like, oh yeah, that's a great choice. Having read this prior to this becoming the K-State read, I was very impressed and happy that we made that choice. This book is the book, and of course, Ambrose-Smith's work are extremely powerful. You know, in rereading Marrow Thieves, it took me back really on kind of a journey, and had me thinking about the experiences that I've had, what is painful. And there are a lot of things that are painful in this book, and especially for those of Native or Indigenous identity, those of other themes, particularly of sexuality or gender identity within the pages of the book. And it can be a hard read. It can be a hard and difficult aspect of our education. I love this line, everyone tells their own coming to story. That's the rule. Everyone's creation story is their own. And that's so extremely true. And these two quotes are, of course, part of larger themes, not only within the book, but larger themes within us, within our experiences, within our education. When we're talking about coming to stories, I really want our readers to understand we are always evolving. Our stories are evolving. And we're creating our stories. That's part of that not only growing up, right? Not only maturing but it's also educating ourselves and really learning about who we are and how we contribute not only to our own well-being, but the well-being of others. So those creation stories that we have as part of us, as part of our identity, as part of who we are, really fit in together. And it's interesting that in the creation stories within our cultures, being Indigenous, we have our creation stories, right? Every culture has their creation story, but I want our readers and those that are with us tonight to really think about our creation story, your own personal creation story. Which goes along right with here at K-State, the my story, your story, our story. And I feel like that's so powerful and very much all of this is fitting together so well. As we come back into the after times. I'm sorry, the past 18 months, I've really divided into the before times and the after times. And that's not being flippant. That is really how I have helped create that story for myself. And that, you know, there was a period that we're emerging from. And so it's about our creation from that period of time into the new time. And so it's really, anyway, I'll get off my tangent there. But also I want us to think that as part of those stories, we all have our stories about our sexuality, about our gender identity, about our Indigenous life. You know, for so long, our stories being queer or being Indigenous, we were not allowed to tell our stories. We hid our stories. And so many people fought for us to be here today, to be able to talk about this. And that leads me into the second quote that I felt was so powerful and really really popped out to me. You know, it was Shy Boy who answered out of character. Sometimes you risk everything for a life worth living, even if you're not the one that'll be alive to live it. And it is about risk. It is about taking risk, and about what we go through today, what our parents have been through, our grandparents have been through, our families have risked absolutely everything. And there is a part of us that has experienced and continues to experience resiliency. So I know that I have a little bit of time left. But I wanted to read you something from Abigail Echohawk. Abigail is of the Pawnee Nation and the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute. And Abigail says, "We are not a historically underserved population. My history is one of ancestors who survived so I could thrive. My history didn't start with Western civilization. I am colonially underserved. I am institutionally underserved. And I am historically resilient. And so that part about resilience fits in with what we're talking about today. We have been resilient since 2020, 2019. We've lived through a pandemic. That fits so perfectly. And this book is we have chosen this book at such a perfect time. And I hope that the readers see that. And I hope that the readers can bring not only their experiences from the past 18 months or 2 years into what they're reading, but they also think about that resiliency and the resiliency of people. I hope that our readers are able to look at the words in this book and how historically juxtaposed, right? So this is a dystopian futuristic novel that has such mirror images with Indigenous history. And I hope that the readers do look at that very carefully. This image, I wanted to share this image with you and I'm going to wrap this up, I promise, Lisa. But I wanted to share this image with you. It's Ambrose-Smith's The Storyteller. And I thought it was very fitting because this is about stories. This is about creation. This is about that system of resiliency that we build. And you have Coyote in the middle with the pipe and with the very stoic coat that I almost imagine has the little patches on the elbows and, and the very educated, looking at history, and it's a history of modernism, of what Native life has become, or the images that we have become. But we are so much more than that. So I want to remind everyone as I wrap up here, Indigenous Peoples Day will be October 11th. We are hosting the I can't remember what year it is, Lisa, but IPD is, we've been doing this for several years with IFSA, 6, yes. And so join us for that. KS Unite will be on the 12th. Both of those will have themes from this book. We want to be able to also incorporate and join with the Beach Museum in making sure that people know that the artwork is there and that this is all a part of our campus community right now, and our campus story. And also on the 15th is the LGBTQ leadership conference. And so that will include also themes of indigeneity and two-spirit lives. So if you're able to join us for that week, really, also that is the Beach Museum's anniversary, I believe. So there's going to be more celebrations there going on. But as you're reading, to wrap up, as you're reading this, please think of your creation story. Think of your coming to story, your education, your creation, and think about that resilience. What you're able to risk, what you're willing to risk, so that those around us in our community can be the better for it. So thank you. I'll pass it to you, Lisa.
Great, thank you so much, Brandon. And again, I love the way that that the story is, we can't understand ourselves unless we understand our past and apply it to our presence. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Lisa can share.
Hi, folks. I'm doing something very brave tonight. I'm going to share 2 different things. So I'm going to share screen twice. So stay with me and, keep your fingers crossed. Thanks so much, Tara and Kathrine and Brandon. Brandon, that was so powerful. It's really nice to be able to be here to hear your words. I'm Lisa Tatonetti. I'm a settler or a non-native scholar. I'm part of the Indigenous Faculty Staff Alliance. I'm an ally and a co-conspirator in that. So I wanted to start by saying that the Marrow Thieves is incredibly important. And in so many ways, it's one, just a few awards. I will say the Governor General's Literary Awards, which is one of the biggest awards in Canada, the Burt Award for First Nations, Métis and Inuit Lit, the Sunburst Award for Young Adult Fiction, the Kirkus Prize. It was CBC's Canada Reads. Okay, so if you know what K-State First is, Canada Reads is like K-State First for all of Canada. So I just want to say this book has been on #1 bestseller list in Canada for more than a year. It's really, it really has impact, and it's made a difference in Indigenous communities in Canada, in the US, across the world, in terms of Native folks who have read it, as Brandon was talking about its impact. And for me, I've been teaching the Marrow Thieves since it came out, almost the first semester since it came out, in grad courses, in freshman courses, non-traditional and traditional students, and it's universally beloved. And in part, I think this is because of the kind of things that are already being talked about. Dimaline brings forward issues of language, Anishinaabe and Cree, storytelling. She's really interested in kinship. And what that means. And she's a queer Indigenous writer. And so Two-Spirit and LGBTQ issues play a part in this book in just a beautiful, beautiful way. And in a way that I think is somewhat unusual, although I'm giving no spoilers like Brandon didn't either. But I want to start here by sharing just a minute of Cherie Dimaline's voice. So hopefully it's asking me who can share. I can share, I hope. All right, we've got share sound. Keep your fingers crossed, folks. Let's try it. So a minute of Cherie Dimaline.
Stories are everything for us. You know, it gets complicated when it comes to land because, you know, we're not treaty people. My own family, we were considered squatters on the land that we occupied on the Georgian Bay. And so we are relocated from Drummond Island, relocated from our original homes. And so for us, a lot of the time we carry home in the stories. And my grandmother explained it to me like this. She said, when you are from a people who has to move and is forced to move at a moment's notice, you have to bring everything that's important to you to start over and to continue on being a community. You have to bring that with you. But when you're running, the only thing that your hands are for is for bringing along the youth and for holding the hands of the elders so they can guide you. And so everything that you need has to be carried inside of a story. And so for us, stories are the way that we are a community. They're the way we know where we have been. And they're the instructions for who we are going to be. It's not just about survival. It's about who do you want to be at that moment of survival.
And I'm gonna stop share with that and say, importantly, in that conversation, one of the things we saw is that Dimaline is pushing on that question, who do you want to be at the moment of survival? And that question, it's funny, and another thing I did for K-State First, I played a version of that clip because it really sticks with me at this particular moment, as Brandon said. So I initially planned on talking about the Marrow Thieves as a queer Indigenous text in a long history of queer Indigenous texts. And that really works with the Neal Ambrose-Smith's Coyote that we just saw. And from Upstream, I Caught a Fish, because there are so many queer Indigenous writers that tell Coyote stories because of Coyote's trickster tradition. Coyote changes genders, Coyote cross-dresses. So all of this is connected. But Tara asked us to read a passage. And so that's how we got Brandon's pieces. And there's a particular passage that continues to stick with me that engages questions of survival in the ways that Dimaline talks about her grandmother posing that to her. So I'm going to share my screen on this and read you a little bit of it, talking about the Marrow Thieves' awesomeness. And so let me set the stage for folks who may not be here yet with their reading. This is no spoilers, I promise, Greg. Our group is traveling, all right? They're our ragtag band of Indigenous folks who are traveling, and every night they're around a fire, and they're sharing oral traditions, sharing stories of the apocalypse, sharing stories about survival. And here's a moment of conversation that they have. Wab asks a question. Do you think circumstances make people turn bad, or that people make circumstances bad to begin with? Meeg exhaled a long plume of smoke. Well, that's not an easy question. I read this book once, written by this Algerian fellow, Camus was his name. In this story was all these people trapped inside their own town because the plague attacks them and they are put into quarantine. Our narrator says, I'd never heard a story like this before, but I knew what a plague was. That's what they were calling the dreamlessness when it started, a plague of madness. So these people, Meeg tells us, they start to change. Some of them, like the doctor, stay close to the same because he gives everything he's got, his time, his expertise, his clinic, to working for those people. But I guess that's changed too, just closer to his real nature. So we change because of circumstances, but if you're a good person, you change in a good way. Wab sought to cut to the message right away. Well, now, not necessarily. I think it's more like you do what you need in order to keep yourself intact. It's about motivation. Like how we're motivated to run because of the recruiters, Rose jumped in, and the recruiters are motivated to run after us because of the schools. Almost, he answered. We're actually both motivated by the same thing. Survival. Wab was on her knees now, listening so hard she was leaning toward each speaker. So we're the same, in a way. So then I'm right. If we're both motivated by the same thing and they're the ones hurting people, then that's their nature. They're bad to begin with. Mig steepled his hands and paused before he answered. What would you do to save us? We looked at each other, faces bright in the singular light of the fire. We were family. We were all we had. The rest was dark and unknown. It was Chiboy who answered. Anything. Wab spoke after him. Everything. Exactly. We all do what we can to survive. Right now, they can chase us. And us, we can run. It might not always be this way. And who is to say what we will be capable of? So the Marrow Thieves brings us many things, but one of which is an ethical dilemma, survival in the time of apocalypse. What will we do when we face a plague? What will we do? This dilemma resonates at this particular historical moment. And furthermore, the questions Dimaline offers are not just hard questions, but also they're timeless. So these questions appear in 100 years of dystopic literature, and they also appear and are put forward by the many queer Indigenous writers who precede Dimaline. These questions of survival are asked again and again in the context of Indigenous literatures because there's been an apocalypse in historical memory since at least 1492. With this in mind, I want to end then not with my words, but with the words of another Native writer, Rebecca Roanhorse, who has a great essay called Welcome to the Apocalypse that I teach with Marrow Thieves often. And she talks about what a dystopic book of fiction like the Marrow Thieves means. She tells us, to be native of North America is to exist in a space where the past and the future mix in a delicate swirl of the here and now. We stand with one foot always in the darkness that ended our world, and the other in a hope for our future as Indigenous people. It is from this apocalyptic in-between that the Indigenous voices in speculative fiction speak. We have been, we are, and we always will be. I hope reading the Marrow Thieves this semester and talking about it with folks will bring you to think more about these questions that Dimaline and Roanhorse bring us, and to understand better kind of the Indigenous histories that underland everywhere you stand in the United States. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And again, I just, it's wonderful to just see these wonderful themes repeat, and each of us has picked up on them in different ways. I would like to take some time now. We did have one question and Brenda did answer it in the chat. But Brandon, can you address the idea of two-spirit for people who may not be familiar with that term?
Right. So two-spirit is a strictly Indigenous term, an identity of gender that is outside of the binary. So neither male nor female. Each culture and native culture, Indigenous culture, has their own conceptualization of gender. There may be binary, but oftentimes it's referred to as the third gender. But with gender being so fluid, often those individuals that identify as two-spirit identify within that fluidity. It's also, and so depending on your cultural identity within indigeneity, sexuality can be wrapped up in that as well. It's not, and Lisa has knows much literature on two-spirit identity too, but it's a conceptualization of sexuality and gender that is non-Western. It's Indigenous and non-colonized.
Thank you. Looking to see if there's other questions. Do panelists have questions for each other?
I have a question for Lisa and Brandon. My classes have started to read this book, and one of the things that they're so shocked by, maybe not shocked, they're really disturbed by how the book starts, that it's so shocky and jumpy. And I usually ask them, why would we be thrown into a story like that? I wondered if you could talk about why we might be thrown into a situation instead of being eased in and given some background once we start. A lot of our audience at the university, this might be unfamiliar. And sometimes people will question, why did you pick this thing that I don't understand?
Lisa's the English faculty. I think that draws us in, right? Instead of turning us away, it should draw us in. I want to know, we're dropped into that story for a reason. We're dropped into that space for a reason. I rather love the way that it begins with the climbing of the pine and how that there's so much significance there, right? Of loss, of fear, of just trying to hang on to a piece of what you know in the face of something so tragic and traumatic. And I think that dropping us into that place and space at that moment is so brilliant on Dimaline's part, because it draws us in.
And I would add, it's immediately, so it does draw us in, and it's immediately the dissolution of family, which is one of the things the book is really interested in, is what does family mean? What does it mean to Indigenous people who have been pulled, forced from their homes, who have had children taken away and put into boarding schools and residential schools? And so I think that there's the literary, we're starting in medias res in the middle of a story, but also we have this Indigenous history that you don't have to know to jump into that moment. But I think it's backgrounding, her interest in kinship, and also in the reconstituted families that occur over the course of the text. So, yeah. And it's super dystopic. I teach dystopic lit a lot, and it's a class.
I'm glad that yeah, I forget that, I'm glad that you said that about it drops you into that time without knowing that history. Because I often forget people don't know our history. So I hope that and what Lisa just said is, you know, there are again those comparisons of the historical nature within that, within this book, within this reading as a whole. And I hope that that encourages individuals to take it upon themselves to learn more about that history. You know, right now, you know, with the residential schools in the news, and we're just at the tip of that iceberg here in the United States. You know, what we're seeing in Canada with the First Nations res schools and the historical trauma associated with them, which we knew was there, but now we're finding those bodies, and we have evidence, and we're just getting started here in the U.S. And so if there's a huge comparative in the book, so
Yeah. I love how MIG becomes that medium that allows those who don't know the history, you know, his story, that sort of the two-part story that he tells, you know, brings so much of that history at least partially to the forefront, so that somebody does begin to learn something about the history through his story.
absolutely.
I have another question. I don't want to take up everyone's question time, but why are we calling this an Indigenous book or written by an Indigenous author? When I was growing up, when I learned history or contemporary people, it was always American Indian, Native American. So for a lot of people, the term Indigenous is going to be a little new. And I've never really heard of the explanation of why that's the language that we're using today.
There are nice ways of putting that. You know, everybody, and again, it's going back to what I was talking about earlier, it's part of our creation story. It's about, it's really a part of how we create our stories. You know, you have people in one family that will say that they're First Nations, or that they are Native American, that they're an American Indian, or Indigenous. I mean, you may hear that, and I'm, for myself, I switch it too, and it goes back to that, the historical colonization of our language, of the replacement of our language with what they wanted us to be called. It wasn't about our identity, it was about their identity and what they wanted us to be. But now I feel like, you know, we have an opportunity, and we've been striving toward taking back our language. Our languages are dying. Every single day, our languages are dying. Indigenous languages are dying all over the world, all over the globe. And so, you know, I think that it's important that we are allowed, first and foremost, allowed to call ourselves how we want to be referred to, but also to acknowledge that we all have our own creation story, that my culture, myself, my culture may not be the same as someone who, you know, another culture that was forced on the same land that we were, and who may have a different language for how they want to be represented.
I think Brandon put that well, but I also want to add one of the things Alex Redcorn always brings up, because he writes ed grants, is American Indian is the U.S. government category. And I always talk about the fact that some of this is regional. So in terms of around here, it would be Native American. If we're in the Southwest, it's all American Indian. But as Brandon said, all of those things, as he pointed out, are colonized terms. So you know, I always talk to my students about the fact that you always want to call somebody by their tribal, you know, affiliation. If you know they're Salage or Cherokee, you say that. If you know Dimaline is Métis, you say Métis. She's definitely, first of all, Dimaline is not Native American because she's north of the border. So she's First Nations. Well, First Nations Inuit Métis. She's Métis. But First Nations is an overarching category that's often used in Canada. So it's the category is coming from the government, unless you're talking about what people call themselves, as Brandon was saying.
And I have a friend, Pat Murphy, who we talked about this a lot, and he said, were you born in America? Then you're a Native American. So that term in many ways doesn't make any sense at all, as but again, there's some other people may, find that the way they want to be so referred to. Well, we had one person share that, and she has pictures, family pictures, and of that before and after period with the residential schools. And it is interesting. So many of the artists in our collection, the Indigenous artists in our collection, had experiences in those residential schools. And for some, the experience was really very traumatic. And then we have others like Harrison Begay, who was able to go to the Santa Fe Indian School and study art and, have a very different experience. So it's something that we've really been interested in the artists in our collection. So.
And I want to add, in thinking about art, that's a repurposing and art as activism again, in the ways that those before and after pictures have been taken by Indigenous artists and, and recolored or, made into some sort of collage. I mean, that is, again, art as activism to make commentary on, the Indian schools, the residential schools, the boarding schools, and those expectations of identity. So again, we get those intersections of what art is doing.
Right. And we have graciously, Bunky Echohawk donated. He visited with us last year, invited by our Native American Student Body Organization, and did a painting for us that entitled Land Back. And it is now hanging in the Morris Family Multicultural Student Center. Please go by there and see it. It's powerful. And Bunky, I love Bunky. He's Pawnee, and he's his work is great. It's modern. It's and it has you can read the story with it, right? Lisa, I know that we sat there, we got to sit there and watch them do this painting physically in front of us, and so powerful. And he conceptualized it and finished it, listening to the stories of our students, listening to the voices of our students here at K-State. We are a land grant institution. Being a land grant institution means that this land was taken. So it's very important. And I whenever I see it, the value goes well beyond what it's worth, right? It means so much to so many of us, that it is hanging in a prominent space, and that it is saying what we all are feeling land back.
There's
I'm hoping that we have time for one last sort of comment. And this is one that sort of looks at the book. I'll just read the comment. It seems like the target reader for the book is definitely, and in some ways exclusively, Native youth or peoples. At times there are things that I think only Indigenous folks may understand, and these go unexplained. For example, the significance of sweetgrass that our traveling group is delighted to see near a field at the end. Any responses to that?
Yeah, I'm gonna butcher a quote that says, books are sometimes mirrors, sometimes they're windows, and sometimes they're sliding doors. So it is possible that if you're reading this and it's unfamiliar, it was written for a certain audience. But it also might mean that most of your reading is of things about you. I think if we look at what we read a lot or listen to, we might not realize that a lot of the things we're talking about that we're so comfortable with and we think everybody knows and is very common is not. If you're not from Kansas, the way people casually talk about country music might seem foreign, or the food that we eat that we assume everyone is familiar with. I was talking to a girlfriend who talked about something they do in church that everybody does, and I'd never heard of that particular tradition. And the look she gave me implied that I was the weirdo for not knowing that, but it's like, well, that's not my faith. Why would I know that? So I think that I'm glad you had that experience. I hope that it made you curious about what they were talking about, but also to think about the things that you find so common and regular, and how that might look to people who are not in your demographic group.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful response. I'm afraid we need to draw this to a close this evening. So I want to thank Tara and Lisa and Brandon for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. I want to thank Jennifer Harlan, who is our events coordinator here at the museum. She's kind of kept things going for us and made sure that it all went smoothly, and our captioner as well. Again, this will be within a week or two up on our YouTube channel. So if you have friends who couldn't make it and are interested, please share that information with them and read the book and come see the work of art. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks for coming, everybody.